The supermarket was packed, with long lines and impatient stares. A young Walmart cashier, her uniform wrinkled and her hands trembling, entered each code with the utmost care. But all it took was a system error for a customer with an arrogant tone and narrowed eyes to burst out loud, "You're useless, girl. Even a robot could do better than you." Laughter erupted around her, looks of contempt multiplied, and the girl lowered her head, feeling her cheeks burn. Her heart pounded wildly, her eyes watering, begging only for it to end quickly. The room became a public courtroom with every sigh and whisper, a silent verdict against her. In that moment, her dignity seemed to have been ripped away in front of everyone, crushed under the weight of humiliation. And just when she thought it would be just another day of pain and invisibility, an unexpected presence appeared behind her, observing every detail with an almost disturbing calm. A heavy silence fell over the hallway as a man in a dark suit, discreet but with an imposing posture, slowly advanced toward the cashier. No one knew who he was, but his gaze carried authority. He approached the customer and said in a firm but low voice, "Watch your words. You have no idea who's serving you today." The woman laughed mockingly, muttering something about rich defending the poor. But then, in front of everyone, the man pulled a metal badge with the chain's logo emblazoned on it from his pocket and announced, "She's the new manager of this store. Appointment made by myself and she starts today." A shock rippled through the room. The whispers turned to absolute silence, and the customer who had been laughing before now didn't know where to hide her face. The young woman, still with tears in her eyes, stared at him in astonishment, unable to understand how this stranger knew her fate before she even believed it possible. If this scene has already made you feel the shame, injustice, and unexpected twists that life can bring, don't miss it. Subscribe to the channel now to follow each new story that touches your heart and exposes the power of destiny. Leave a like to further strengthen this space where we reveal that no one stays on the ground forever. And write in the comments, do you believe that justice comes at the right time even when everyone seems against you? Your answer may inspire others who are also living their own silent battles. The automatic doors opened with a cold blast of air conditioning, and Walmart breathed white light, too bright for those with sleep-deprived eyes. Carts creaked like metallic protests, children complained about the wrong cereal, and the loudspeaker blasted cheerful music that ignored any human sadness. It was the beginning of the month. Crowded aisles, yellow tags flashing like promises of relief, and at checkout number 8, the young woman adjusted her badge with fingers that couldn't hide her nervousness. Her hastily tied hair betrayed the race against the clock, the rain that had surprised her at the checkout, and the haste of someone who couldn't be even a minute late. The blue uniform felt like shelter and shackles at the same time. It fit and disappeared into it. She watched people choose, return, change their minds, and learn to read the silences, those born of haste, those born of arrogance, those born of fear of the card being denied. She smiled with restrained kindness, deftly passing products around, and behind her smile, she made another calculation. How much does it cost to remain whole when the world pushes you? Further back, a woman in an expensive coat, untouched nail polish, and gleaming impatience rolled her eyes before even being served, as if the entire store existed to bend to her timing. In the back, near the electronics section, a man in a simple suit, expensive only to trained eyes, walked unhurriedly, observing. He was discreet, almost invisible in the sea of caps and t-shirts, but his eyes registered everything. The growing line, the brewing impatience, the lack of supervisors at the most critical time, the mismatch between what the store promised and what it actually delivered. He stopped near a shelf of batteries, picked up a random package, and headed toward the cashier as if he were just another regular customer. As he passed, he noticed the young woman at checkout counter, 8, caring for people like someone holding a paper boat in a storm. A soft voice for the elderly woman, deftness in correcting an incorrect price, politeness in apologizing for something that wasn't her fault. The man leaned against a candy totem, waiting, observing, mentally noting the dance of micro-violences. The loud sigh that humiliates, the laughter that dismisses, the look that measures and discards. The young woman, in turn, performed a delicate choreography of resistance. She checked the weight of the fruit, offered bags with a brief apology, and even found a moment to return to a child the toy car that had fallen under the conveyor belt. Small gestures that seemed insignificant but were a silent manifesto. While everything is rushing, someone insists on treating people as people. On the digital clock above the aisle, the numbers jumped to 5:02 p.m. The local manager disappeared behind the stockroom doors, and the line at checkout counter 8 grew like a tide. The man in the suit noticed a shadow of fear in the young woman's eyes, the doubt gnawing at her core. What if something goes wrong? And as if the universe had heard the question, the system blinked twice, delayed the reading, and spat out an unstable connection warning. The white-haired woman smiled patiently. The woman in the expensive coat, however, lifted her chin, ready to turn any delay into a cruel argument about incompetence. The entire Walmart seemed to hold its breath for a second. Outside, the parking lot reflected heavy clouds in puddles, and a long wind buffeted the flagpoles, leaving them stretched. Unapologetically. Inside, in the cold glow of the neon signs, history chose its places. Box number 8 as the stage, the line as the audience, the arrogant woman as the antagonist, and the discreet man as the silent witness. The young woman, with trembling hands and a courage she couldn't quite name, held the scanner as if grasping a chance and said quietly, "Please pass the next one." Before she was a cashier at Walmart, even before she donned a blue uniform with a laminated badge, that young woman already knew the weight of surviving in silence. She grew up in a small worn wooden house in a neighborhood where the buses rarely ran on time. Her father had disappeared when she was still learning to read, leaving only an echo of broken promises and an exhausted mother who cleaned until her bones cried out for rest. The smell of cleaning products became part of her childhood, mixed with the sound of old radios playing in other people's homes, as she sat on stairs with worn notebooks, inventing worlds to forget the absence of toys. She never had a room of her own, nor a bed of her own. She shared a mattress with her younger sister until she was a teenager, accustomed to dreaming in a huddle. But there was something in her eyes that didn't fit the scenery. A hunger to prove she could be more than that, a flame that not even the rain that came through the roof could extinguish. At school, she endured the teasing for always wearing the same worn-out pair of sneakers, the taunts. When she turned down invitations because she didn't have money for lunch, she learned to hide her pain in silence and hold her head high as if nothing affected her. But inside, every word became a scar. At 16, her mother fell ill, and life became even harsher. She took over the house, worked as a nanny, a street vendor, and cleaned tables in diners, where she was also treated as invisible. Every coin she saved was a cry of resistance, every sleepless night a prayer swallowed without a voice. In moments of solitude, she stared at the cracked ceiling and made pacts with herself. I will not repeat this story. I will not be defined by failure. Walmart appeared as both a refuge and a burden. A refuge because there, at least, there was a steady paycheck and minimal stability. A burden because, for many, working at the cash register was synonymous with failure, as if it were just another replaceable cog. But she accepted, because she knew that dignity has no glamour. Each note recorded was a stepping stone. Each client served was a training ground for patience. Pain had shaped her into something few saw. Behind the delicacy, there was steel. Behind the humility, there was fire. What no one there knew was that the same girl, humiliated by circumstances, had a closely guarded secret, something that connected her story to paths greater than anyone could imagine. And deep down, she herself didn't yet know that a simple work shift would be the beginning of the revelation of that secret. That afternoon, as the line at checkout 8 grew longer, something quieter simmered in the air. A kind of invisible wager the young woman seemed unaware she was participating in. The woman in the expensive coat, impatient from the moment she arrived, wasn't just buying products. She was putting on a show. The luxury car still gleamed in the priority parking spot. Expensive bags from other stores mingled with the cart full of ordinary purchases, as if she wanted to shout to everyone that she could buy anything, anywhere. But the truth was, her anger wasn't rooted in the slow line or the slow system. It came from the desire for someone to belittle, someone on whom she could vent her frustration. And the cashier with the young face and wrinkled uniform was the perfect target. Two other customers, her friends, whispered and laughed in the background, like accomplices awaiting the climax of a play. Walmart was transforming into a stage for rehearsed cruelty. All it took was for the scanner to freeze for a few seconds, for the woman to raise her voice. "Wanna bet how long it takes this useless woman to go through a whole cart? 10 minutes? 20? Short chuckles echoed, and the cruel game began. Curious eyes turned, some in embarrassed silence, others complicit in the mischief, because deep down there are those who enjoy seeing a smaller person being crushed in public. The young woman tried to smile, swallowing her embarrassment as she manually entered the code. But the customer wouldn't stop. "What must she have studied part-time at school? I bet she can't even do math in her head." Her friends laughed. Walmart, which should have been just another routine scene, was transformed into a court of mockery, each product on the conveyor belt becoming ammunition for more venomous comments. And, as if fate also wanted to test her limits, the card machine failed on the first try, forcing her to ask the customer in front of her to try again. Her smile was fragile. Her eyes were beginning to well up, but she still maintained an almost heroic calm. Meanwhile, further back, the man in the suit continued to watch. Not with the haste of someone witnessing a random mistake, but with the attention of someone who sees in small cruelties the portrait of an entire system. His silence contrasted with the noise of humiliation. It was as if he noted every unspoken word, every gesture of suppressed pain, and already knew that something much greater was about to reveal itself. But for everyone there, it was just another day, another shift, another show of someone being diminished. No one imagined that this scene, constructed in tones of humiliation, was about to become the first crack in a story that would completely change the logic of power within that store. The sound of conveyor belts rolling, bags being opened, and the constant beeping of the scanner filled the room. But to the young woman, everything sounded muffled, as if underwater. Every word the woman in the expensive coat spoke cut deeper than the white lights could hide. Her teary eyes tried to hide it, but her body trembled, betraying the effort of remaining standing. It was at that moment that he approached. The man in the simple but impeccable suit walked to the line and stopped right behind the arrogant customer. He said nothing. He simply watched. His eyes were different from the others. There was no contempt, no rush, no mockery. There was a silent wait, a calm. That was disturbing precisely because it didn't yield to the farce of collective humiliation. The young woman caught a glimpse of his presence, a discreet figure, but couldn't decipher if he was just another customer or something more. She continued working, her hands trying to be steady, her breath catching. When the machine failed again, the woman let out a shrill laugh, turning to him as if seeking complicity. "See? This is what happens when they hire just anyone, a complete waste of time." She expected laughter or agreement, but found only a firm, serious, unblinking gaze. His silence was like a broken mirror in front of the woman. Suddenly, the stage no longer seemed so safe. The cashier, confused, looked up and met his gaze fixed on her for a moment. There was no pity, no arrogance. It was as if he was silently saying, "I see you." It was brief, but enough to stir something inside her. Unaccustomed to being seen as more than a function, that simple contact made her heart race. Unexpectedly. Still, she didn't dare say anything. She simply continued her work, trying to ignore the whispers and the feeling of being about to collapse. The man, in turn, moved a little closer, choosing a line that would inevitably be hers. She put only one item in the basket, a simple pack of batteries, as if she'd chosen anything just to have a reason to get to her cashier. When it was finally her turn, she tried to smile, even though her eyes were still red. "Good afternoon, sir." Her voice was low, almost a whisper. He merely nodded, analyzing every detail of her like someone reading a rare book no one else notices. In the short time she passed the item and told him the price, The silence between them weighed more heavily than any words spoken in the line. It was as if that were the first invisible thread connecting their stories. He, mysterious, carrying a veiled authority. She, tired, trying not to break down in front of the world. On the printed receipt, when she reached out to hand it over, their fingers almost touched. And in that instant, without anyone noticing, a silent connection was born, an invisible promise that something about to happen would change everything. The moment seemed to stabilize when he took the receipt and left the cashier, but the peace was short-lived. The woman in the expensive coat was still there, ready to suck every drop of dignity from the young woman. The system had returned to working order, but she insisted on prolonging the spectacle. She leaned against the counter, arms crossed, and raised her voice for everyone in line to hear. This is why the world doesn't move forward. Useless people occupying positions that anyone with a shred of brains could do better. Look at her. She looks like she'll faint just by pressing a few buttons. Laughter echoed, not from the majority, but from a few who always find pleasure in seeing someone lesser get crushed. The young woman swallowed hard, trying to finish the operation. Quickly, but her trembling hands betrayed her effort. Her eyes filled with tears that she fought to hold back, and her every gesture was like walking through a minefield. Any slip-up would be another reason for mockery. The customer picked up one of the products and held it up in front of everyone, as if displaying proof of her incompetence. How much do you bet she'll get the price wrong again? Let's see if the useless woman even knows how to use a calculator. The embarrassed silence of some mingled with the perverse giggles of others, and the entire room became an arena. The humiliation wasn't just individual, it was a collective spectacle where cruelty fed on the gaze of others. The young woman tried to say something, but her voice faltered. Her face flushed with shame and a stubborn tear fell without permission. It was as if the final straw had officially marked her defeat in that makeshift courtroom. The woman smiled, satisfied, and added dismissively, "Is this the future of, America? People like that? Pathetic." Walmart seemed frozen. Even the cashier's beep lost its power under the weight of her words. Cashier number 8, once just a dot in the middle of a crowd, was now the center of public judgment. She took a deep breath, but there wasn't enough strength to defend herself. He just kept passing the products, as if each scanned code was a silent plea for the torment to end. From the back, the man in the suit watched. He didn't intervene yet, but his eyes held. The gravity of someone who knew exactly what was happening. He saw more than an arrogant customer venting anger. He saw a social machine at work, where those with economic power feel empowered to crush those with little. I saw a young woman being sculpted by pain into something much greater than anyone there imagined. The woman, however, believed she had won. As she gathered her bags, she looked one last time at the cashier and said sharply, "You'll never be anything more than this." It was at that moment that the silence in the young woman's chest transformed into something different. Not a scream, not a defense, but a hidden secret that was beginning to pulsate, ready to become the guiding thread of the entire upheaval. The line had already dissolved. The arrogant customer was walking triumphantly toward the automatic doors, and the young woman, still at register 8, was breathing heavily, trying to get back into the swing of things as if nothing had happened. But something burned inside her, not the shame of having been humiliated, but the awareness of a secret she'd kept hidden, a trump card no one there had even imagined existed. She picked up the scanner, discreetly wiped her tears with the back of her hand, and straightened in her chair, lifting her face for the first time with a different, almost disturbing calm. Her silence until then had been read as weakness, but now it brimmed with contained strength. The man in the suit was still watching from a distance. His eyes narrowed as if sensing this would be the moment the narrative would change. When the next customer approached, the young woman gave an unexpected smile, firm, almost ironic, and said in a clear voice, "Don't worry, ma'am. I'm used to this kind of scene. By the way, this register here will be my office soon." The woman, surprised by the statement, laughed nervously, unsure if it was a joke or arrogance. But the cashier didn't hesitate. She continued working, passing the products with a dexterity that seemed to defy the cruel word she had received minutes before. She said nothing more, but the weight of that statement echoed in the ears of those still nearby. Some thought it was a thoughtless response, others noticed something different in her gaze, as if she were harboring a truth greater than anyone could comprehend. The next customer asked, almost curiously, "What did you mean by that?" She simply smiled slightly, keeping her eyes fixed on the cash register display, and replied, "You'll understand soon enough." It was a brief flash, but enough to transform the atmosphere. The one who had been the victim until seconds ago now seemed to have taken invisible control of the scene, like a chess piece revealing itself to be the queen at the most unlikely moment of the game. The man in the suit, upon hearing it, let out a half-smile, as if confirming that the threads of the plot were aligning exactly as they should. To the rest of the store, it seemed like just a strange response from a humiliated employee. But to those who paid attention to the gleam in her eyes, there was something there that didn't quite match defeat. There was knowledge, there was anticipation, and there was the quiet certainty that history hadn't yet shown its true colors. That night, when the Walmart lights finally dimmed and the aisles fell silent, the man in the suit was still there, in a private meeting with local management. No one knew for sure who he was, only that his presence evoked nervousness and immediate obedience. For the supervisors, the metal badge he wore was enough to understand they were dealing with someone with power far above the store's hierarchy, and it was amidst the reports, the identified flaws, and the recommendations for improvement that her name appeared on a printed document. The document listed prominent employees of the chain, young people who had been secretly nominated for internal training programs, future leaders chosen by the executive board itself, and there, among so many names, was hers. The man in the suit stared at the sheet and let the silence stretch. This employee, cashier number 8, who nominated her? He asked, his voice low but impossible to ignore. The local manager, surprised, responded nervously, "It was a corporate assessment, it wasn't ours. We just received the notice that she was pre-selected for the leadership program, but no one thought she'd take it seriously." The man didn't react immediately. He simply crossed his arms, staring at the name on the paper as if recognizing something he'd already sensed. He remembered the sparkle in her eyes when she'd announced in public that this cash register would be her office. It wasn't bravado, it was a certainty. It was an announcement of destiny. Meanwhile, outside, the young woman walked alone through the parking lot, her uniform still damp with sweat from the day's stress. With each step, she mentally repeated what she'd known for weeks, but that no one there would ever believe. She had passed all the internal, confidential steps and would be officially named store manager in a few days. It was a process they'd kept secret, precisely to assess her posture under real pressure. And that day at cash register 8, unbeknownst to her, she had passed the ultimate test, resisting humiliation without losing her dignity. The man in the suit, now aware of everything, felt a different weight on his chest. This wasn't just a leadership program. It was the embodiment of a larger story. That girl called useless in front of everyone was, in fact, the next face of transformation for the company itself. He closed the folder, looked at his supervisors, and declared, "I want the official announcement prepared tomorrow. Her appointment can't be postponed any longer, and make sure everyone knows exactly who she is." Outside, under the cloudy sky and the yellowed lights of the parking lot, the young woman breathed deeply, unaware that, as she walked with her worn backpack, her secret was already being revealed to the man who would change the course of her life. The next morning, as the sun filtered timidly through the Walmart windows, something was different. Cashier 8, the scene of humiliation and silent revelation, remained empty. The blue uniform the young woman should have been wearing was nowhere to be seen. Lines formed, customers passed by, but her absence was like an open wound in the atmosphere. The nervous manager explained to the others that perhaps she had been late, perhaps she had given up after the previous day's scene, but the truth was, no one had heard from her. She didn't answer her phone, didn't respond to messages, and wasn't seen boarding the morning bus. It was as if she had vanished. The man in the suit, now aware of her importance to the company's future, realized with unease that he had expected to find her in that same place, not as a cashier, but as Someone already bearing the weight of a new position. He walked the aisles, trying to hide his gaze, but her absence was glaring, like a sound that insists on echoing even in the silence. He felt a strange uneasiness he couldn't name. For the first time in a long time, he found himself thinking about someone outside of meetings, outside of charts and reports. He thought of her the moment he held the pen, the moment he read the memos, as if the memory of her teary eyes had become an uncomfortable mirror. It was a mixture of pride and emptiness, as if he'd been deprived of witnessing something that was just beginning to blossom. Days passed, and nothing from her. No one knew if she'd quit, requested a transfer, or simply couldn't handle the public exposure. The man, accustomed to being ruthless with statistics and cold decisions, found his own anxiety strange. He began discreetly asking employees, looking at attendance reports, trying to track records. Nothing. It was as if the young woman had disappeared from the map. Deep down, he knew it wasn't cowardice or avoidance. This wasn't a girl who gave up easily. Her silence seemed calculated, as if she were testing not only the company but him as well. Each day without seeing her was a reminder that he'd lost the invisible thread that connected their stories. Walmart continued operating, but something was broken. Cashier number 8 had become a symbol of absence, a stage without an actress, and in the heart of the man, accustomed to controlling narratives, her absence was an unexpected wound. The first time in years that not getting an answer was more painful than any negative result in a report. Her absence began to become a whisper within the company. The man in the suit, previously an untouchable figure, began to be the target of questions he couldn't answer. In meetings with regional directors, the young woman's name appeared in reports as a broken promise, as a lost investment. She was the right choice to lead that unit, and now she simply disappeared. What happened? They asked in a demanding tone. He, accustomed to dictating the course of conversations, found himself speechless for the first time. His silence, previously read as authority, now seemed like incompetence. Rumors began to circulate. Employees said the young woman had quit because she couldn't handle the pressure. Others claimed he had been negligent, unable to support someone on the rise. Local blogs picked up the story, and discreet. Headlines popped up. Humiliated employee disappears before taking management position. It was as if everyone was pointing to him as the invisible culprit behind the failure of a promise. In the corporate corridors, where smiles are always calculated, he felt the weight of the stares, no longer of respect but of judgment. The humiliation he had previously witnessed now turned against him, on a different scale but with the same ferocity. At a corporate dinner, an executive commented loudly, audibly enough, "Interesting how some people know how to identify numbers, but not how to identify people." The seemingly generic comment fell upon him like a sentence. For the first time, he felt the vertigo of being on the wrong side of the narrative. It was as if her absence had disrupted not only his routine, but also his reputation. Calmer, silent, worked perfectly. He, who had silently observed her humiliation, now became a spectator of his own exposure. There was no visible audience, no laughter in the supermarket line, but there was something even crueler. The cold judgment of his peers, the whispered disapproval in the hallways, the public questioning of his leadership abilities. He realized he was not invulnerable, and every night, alone in his glass apartment overlooking the city, he remembered her eyes, the enigmatic phrase she had spoken to the client, "You'll understand soon." Now, he was the one who didn't understand. Her absence wasn't just a physical absence, it was a living reminder that his position could be dismantled, not by a declared enemy, but by a young woman who, even in silence, had become the epicenter of his moral downfall. The nights grew longer for him. The glass apartment, which had always seemed a symbol of victory, was now nothing more than a silent aquarium, where he saw himself reflected without recognizing his own face. The cold walls no longer gave him a sense of security, and the silence that had once been a luxury was now a punishment. There was no longer the relief of reports, nor the adrenaline of meetings where his word was law. All that remained was the memory of a teary eye at a supermarket checkout, and the strange feeling of having failed someone who had never asked him for anything. He began to mentally review every detail of that day. The humiliation she had suffered, the laughter of the customers, the solitary tear that had fallen uncontrollably. He asked himself why he had waited so long to intervene, why his authority had cowered in the face of banal cruelty, and the more he thought, the smaller he felt. The businessman, accustomed to measuring people with numbers and graphs, now found himself crushed by the realization that he had lost something that could not be quantified. For the first time, he wished he weren't a millionaire, not tied to schedules, positions, and strategies. He wished he'd been just an ordinary customer, able to hold her hand when he needed it most. Her absence began to work on him like a silent discipline. He stopped attending corporate dinners, declined invitations to social gatherings, and began walking anonymously through the chain stores, observing employees, noticing tired looks, noticing stories he'd never cared to notice before. He discovered the middle-aged woman who worked folding clothes to support 2 grandchildren, the young man in the warehouse who studied engineering at night and always arrived exhausted, the pregnant woman who wouldn't take leave for fear of losing her job. Stories that had previously been mere statistics now had faces, carried weight, and each one was a mirror of what he hadn't seen in her at the time. Gradually, pride gave way to humility. He stopped talking so much and began listening more. His notes were no longer about profit per square meter, but about human conditions, about dignity. He was changing, and he knew it. The man who had once been defined by numbers now found himself haunted by a simple question: who am I? When no one applauds me? And the answer, however painful, always came with the same face. Hers, the young woman at cash register 8, who with one tear had taught him more than all the corporate reports of a decade. Their reunion didn't happen under office lights or in corporate hallways. It was a grey afternoon, when the wind rustled leaves through the empty parking lot of a smaller branch of the chain. He had spent the last few months wandering anonymously between stores, as if searching, not only for answers, but also for signs of her. Until, upon entering those automatic doors, he saw her. She looked different. Her blue uniform had been replaced by a simple but elegant blazer, and her name tag now bore a title many would never believe was hers: Operations Manager. She walked with firm steps, calmly giving instructions to employees who followed her with sincere respect. Her hands no longer trembled, her tears no longer held back. There was authority, but a gentle authority, earned through the iron of humiliation and the courage of silence. He paused motionless for a moment. His heart, accustomed to precise numbers, now beat irregularly like a broken clock. He approached slowly, and when she saw him, there was neither shock nor surprise. Just a look that said, "I knew this moment would come." Time seemed to stand still. Around him, customers pushed carts, cashiers rang up purchases, but between them was a bubble of absolute silence. He tried to speak, but his voice faltered. The weight of everything he hadn't said in the past suffocated him. Finally, he managed to get the words out. "You can't imagine how much I searched for you." She held his gaze firmly and replied calmly, "You didn't need to search. I was never lost." The sentence fell on him like a soft but sure blow. It was true. She hadn't disappeared out of weakness, but by choice. She had needed to walk away to grow, to prove to herself that she didn't depend on anyone to fill the place that was already rightfully hers. He, ashamed, lowered his eyes for a moment. "I should have done more that day. I should have stopped everything, defended you." She took a deep breath and replied, without anger, but also without gentleness, "You did exactly what you needed to. You remained silent, and it was in that silence that I discovered my own voice." Their reunion was not marked by hugs or easy tears. It was marked by the power of a truth that didn't need to be shouted. He, transformed, recognized in her the figure that now represented not just a store manager, but a symbol of what happens when dignity resists. She, firmly, recognized in him no longer the distant millionaire, but a man broken by his own conscience. And in that moment, the karma seemed complete. The humiliated were now respected. The powerful now learned to be small. The reunion had already left the air heavy with unspoken meaning, but the real scene was yet to unfold. They remained silent for a few seconds, surrounded by the store's daily hubbub, as if the world around them were merely a backdrop for that moment. He took a deep breath, his voice trembling, and blurted out, "I didn't come here as an executive, nor as a millionaire. I came as someone in need of forgiveness." The weight of the sentence reverberated. All his life he had been in the position of granting or taking away power, but he had never placed himself vulnerable before anyone. Now, before her, there was no armor, no badge to protect him. There was only a man, marked by regret. She looked at him calmly, but in no hurry to respond. She walked to the nearest counter, rested her hands on the surface, and kept her gaze fixed on him. Forgiveness isn't a bargaining chip, sir. It's not something you ask for like you're signing a contract. Forgiveness is a choice that arises within those who have suffered. And I had to decide, in these months I was away, if your voice still deserved a place in my life. He swallowed hard. Her words cut like blades sharpened by the truth. For a moment, the fear of rejection pierced his erect posture, but she continued, "I didn't disappear out of anger, nor to escape. I had to walk away because the pain of humiliation was with me, and I needed to rebuild myself without depending on anyone to lift me up. Today I'm here not because you or the company believed in me, but because I believed. And that makes all the difference." The silence between them weighed heavily. She took a deep breath, and her eyes welled up, not from fragility but from strength. "I've decided not to hold a grudge. I don't want your image to remain stuck in the moment I was left in tears in front of a line. But don't expect me to come back to you as if nothing had happened. I grant forgiveness. I don't know if you'll ever regain that trust." The words were like a final sentence, just and irrefutable. He lowered his head, relieved by the forgiveness, but crushed by the distance that still remained. For him, it was a disguised goodbye. For her, it was a liberation. There was no anger in her voice, only the certainty of someone who chooses to move forward, carrying only what they build, and leaving behind what weighs them down. When she walked away, summoned by an employee who needed guidance, he remained standing, motionless, like a statue of repentance. The decision had been made. She had forgiven him, but she had chosen to walk without looking back. Night fell over the city like a heavy blanket, and the Walmart lights reflected off the wet asphalt of the empty parking lot. He remained in the car for a few minutes, watching from afar as the automatic doors opened and closed, as if each movement were a reminder of what he had lost and what would never be the same again. On the other side of the glass, she left the store accompanied by 2 employees, guiding them calmly, with firm steps, a neat blazer and a serene expression. There was no longer a shadow of the humiliated young woman at checkout. Before him walked the woman who had transformed pain into authority. She said goodbye to her colleagues, put the papers in her briefcase, and for a moment raised her face to the sky, letting the light rain fall on her hair. There was no sadness in her expression, only a kind of melancholy peace, the peace of someone who knows they have won inside without having to crush anyone. He watched in silence, his eyes welling up, but without the courage to get out of the car. He gripped the steering, wheeled tightly, feeling that justice was already complete. Not the kind written in contracts, but the silent kind, the kind that happens deep within when each person receives back what they offered to the world. She walked toward the bus stop, preferring the simplicity of ordinary life to the comforts offered by any fortune. And as he watched her disappear into the night's mist, he understood that some encounters are not meant to become partnerships, but to leave lasting scars. Deep down there was no need for final words. The scene said it all. She, raised by her own merit, free from the shadow of humiliation. He, surrounded by wealth and solitude, condemned to forever carry the memory of the day he saw her triumph without needing to conquer him. If you got this far, tell me in the comments, what struck you most in this story? The humiliation, the forgiveness, or the transformation? Your opinion is very important. Take advantage and leave a like to support, subscribe to the channel, so you don't miss the next stories. And right now, click on the video that's showing on your screen, because it will move you even more.